Good morning. I'm Annie van Rensburg, Senior Counsel. I'm proceeding with my lectures on criminal law. The next topic that I would like to discuss is Section 35 of the Constitution. Now, I have emailed you a very good book on Know Your Rights on Section 35. And the starting point thereof is that know your rights. Each and every person in our country has got certain rights under the Bill of Rights in Chapter 2 of the Constitution, of which Section 35 in the criminal environment specifically deal with accused, detained, and accused persons. Now, what does this mean? The very broad term thereof is that any person in those three categories has got basically the right to remain silent, to say nothing, to sign nothing, and not to incriminate himself or herself. But obviously, for the law enforcement agencies, this section is just on paper. To them, it is just something that has been typed and incorporated in the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. So why worry? And I'll tell you why. As soon as a person has been arrested, he is not an accused yet. He's only a suspect. Now, you can read in that book about suspects. Suspects, in the broad sense, does not have Section 35 rights. And you will find that in criminal law, if you go onto a trial, the first thing everybody is concerned about is your Section 35 rights. And then this police officer will come and stand there with an open face, addressing the court, saying, "My lord, when I arrested the accused, the person before the court, I have informed him of his Section 35 rights." Then the cover is sort of blown. Because in many instances, if you ask that same police officer during cross-examination, what is Section 35 rights that you are referring to? You will get the most funny answers I have ever heard. Anything from his main right is to remain silent. Why did you have an interview with the accused and took down a warning statement? Because I had to. It's procedural. Where is the document that the accused signed where his constitutional rights was explained to him? It's on the file. It is on page A19. And then you take page A19 and you will see the most wonderful experience in your life, because your client was arrested on the 1st of April. And that Section 35 notice is only signed on the 3rd or the 4th or the 5th of April. So what happened in between? No, he was in the cells. He was awaiting that I returned from investigation. Then you go to the warning statement, and the warning statement has been taken down on the 2nd of April. You say, "But, sir, my client has been arrested on the 1st of April. You agree?" Yes. Is this notice in terms of Section 35 has only been signed on the 5th of April? Yes. The warning statement has been taken down on the 2nd of April. I didn't take down the statement. You would agree with me that there was an infringement on the constitutional rights of accused number 35. Let's say number 3. I didn't take down the statement. Who took the accused to the person that took down the statement? I don't know. And then Somehow, the investigating officer just denied everything before him. He was not involved, it wasn't his duty, he was sick, he was out on patrol, investigating, anything like that. He's got nothing to do with the statements taken down, the warning statement. Because the warning statement is now where somebody sits down and take down a statement of the accused, where the accused then have an opportunity to inform this police officer of what happened in the very broad sense. And the minimum of accused will come by the paragraph that says, do you want to make a statement? Say, no, I'll speak in court. Then it's the end of the story. But normally what is written on that warning statement is the accused is willing to make a statement or a confession or a pointing out, and I am now referring to Captain Chabalala or to somebody to take down the statement or the confession or the pointing out. In the meantime, the accused has either been clobbered or assaulted or threatened or intimidated to such an extent, and as I've indicated to you previously, it is not a very nice place and time to be arrested, and you sit there in the police cells and everybody is walking around and say, you better talk, brother. If you don't talk, we're going to hammer you. Or you must speak. You know you're the best guy in town. If you spill the beans, you're going to become a 204 witness. Don't worry. They don't give them food. They don't give them anything to drink. They leave them. And during the night, when you're supposed to sleep or have a rest, they come by and say, knock, knock, hey, you must wakker word, you must wake up. Hey, brother, you must be alert, eh? We know, your chummies, they spilled the beans, you were there, you were the one that pulled the trigger. You were the one that robbed the girl, you were the one that raped the girl. That's how they work. So they've got their psychological warfare the whole time. And then sometime, before even the legal representative can reach them, they got what they want to. The circle has been closed. You ask the IO or the person that took down the statement. There's specifically paragraphs that make that indicate that the accused has got the right to legal representation. It's all there. You've got the right to legal representation. You've got a choice. If not, the state will give, etc., etc. It's all deleted and it's signed, initialed. Then you ask this person, what did you tell the accused? No, I've informed him. He's got the right to legal representation. And if they cannot get, we will supply. I said, why didn't you do it? No, he didn't want it. I said, my client's instruction is, he's entitled to legal representation. Why didn't you get it? Or provided him with an opportunity to get it? No. Did you have a look at him? Was he injured? No, he was not injured. Where's the photographs? No, there were no photographs. My client will come and tell this court that he's been assaulted by you and by the... No, I wasn't there. But now why would my client come and say you have assaulted him? No, he's lying. He's lying. Be that as it may. There are many of the rights in Section 35, and you must know them, especially in criminal law, because that is the basis where any trial starts off is with Section 35 of the Constitution. You've got the right to legal representation, you've got the right to remain silent, you've got the right to have the contents of the docket or the case against you, you can call witnesses, you can cross-examine witnesses, in instances you are allowed to be, or you've got the right to medical treatment, you've got the right to a public trial, in as short as possible time, but that doesn't work in practice because some accused sit in court for 2.5, 3, 4 years before they finally get to be accommodated in a trial for various reasons. You've got the right to legal representation. You've got the right to be trialed in your home language, and this one is very important as well. In trials that I was involved in, you will find that the accused, they speak different languages, especially where I work down in the Nelspruit area. You get the Portuguese from Mozambique, you get the Swazis from Swaziland, you get the people up there, Gazankulu area, who speaks a very difficult language. You even get them up to Thohoyandou, where they speak Mavenda. Then you to Bronkhorstspruit side, Witbank area, they speak Sotho. If you go around Swaziland, you would speak Zulu. Some of them even speaking what was called the Southern Ndebele. It makes it difficult for you to go and consult, because you might be speaking Afrikaans or English or Sotho or Zulu, and all of a sudden you're confronted with somebody who's speaking Siswati or speaking Portuguese. I even had some Indian people, they speak these funny dialogues. They've got about 250 to 300 different dialogues of the Indian language. So before you even when you go to the pre-trial, you will remember, one of those aspects is what is the language that your accused is speaking. And you must ensure that you convey to the state that they must provide you with an interpreter that can speak the accused language. You end up in court, then there are 5 or 6 accused. You start off with, let's say, Siswati and Venda and those languages up along the Kruger National Park. And when you, a day or two in, one of the accused will put up his hand and he says, no, I speak some funny language from somewhere. Because at the end of the day, and I found it during arguments, where counsel stood up and said, my lord, this court was not dealt with in the home language of my accused. I was just looking at him and I said, what do you mean? He says to me, yes, but let's say he's Zulu speaking and we conducted the trial in Siswati. So I was looking at him and I said, but at the very beginning when we started off with this trial, I expressly put it on record from the court side that we're going to use the following languages, and I confirm with the accused whether they understand it. In other words, black languages in court is very interesting, because as I'm speaking now, my main language is Afrikaans and English. I understand a little bit of some of the black languages, but I cannot really speak them or talk them. But the black people, they are wonderful, because some of them know 4, 5, 6, 7 different languages. So whether you are speaking Siswati as your home language, you can understand Sotho, you can understand Zulu, you can understand Tswana, you can understand Venda. So how now? And then counsel said to me, but that's not his home language. So I said, no, wait a bit. So we played back until I started off with the trial. I said, can you hear? Yeah. I said, specifically, accused number 1, can you understand, let's say, Siswati, Zulu, Ndebele, Northern Sotho, etc. etc. Yes. Number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. Good. But the lesson that I've learned is that you must make sure, as counsel for the defense in a criminal trial, make sure that you tell and confirm with the prosecutor the language of your client, and that there must be an interpreter available. I had one matter in Joburg, the long one, where one of the accused, let's say 2 or 3, they sat there for 2 months, listening to everything, asking questions. And then when he had to come and give evidence, all of a sudden he was speaking some Southern Ndebele or whatever, coming from Zimbabwe. I said to him, but sir, you were sitting here for 2 months, listening to everything, not complaining. We were speaking Zulu and Sotho and Ndebele and Xhosa and English, 5 languages. You sat here the whole time. You have not complained once. As a matter of fact, you directed questions to your counsel, which he then directed to the witness. Be that as it may, make sure about that, because in terms of the Constitution, Section 35, you've got the right to your own home language. The accused has also got the right to contest each and every form and type of witness that is leading as evidence against him in a trial. But you must not just see it in isolation. It's a lot of factors that work together, but it's very important. The most important factor of Section 35 is the right to remain silent and not to incriminate himself or herself. In other words, not to adduce any evidence in any format that can be used against the witness or the accused in a trial against him. And I will come back to pointing outs and confessions a little bit later, where I will deal with you in detail the requirements and the procedure to follow, because you will end up in 90% plus of the cases where each and every case will start off with a trial within a trial regarding the admissibility of a pointing out or a confession. Those are a little bit difficult. They are technical in nature, and you need some experience. And in your book on specific criminal aspects, I've dealt with a whole chapter with an example, with the requirements of how it works and how you should go about. I had an excellent defense counsel in Nelspruit a while ago, where I could see that they understand the contents of Section 35. They understand the contents and the procedures to be followed in drafting or compiling a confession and a pointing out. And I could see he knew exactly where to go and point on that pro forma to have that confession and pointing out being not admitted as evidence against his client. And based on that, his client was discharged in terms of Section 174 of the Criminal Procedure Act, because there were no prima facie evidence against the accused. For the basic right that you've got the right to remain silent, and as I've indicated earlier on, the police have got a method in harassing a suspect and to get information, especially from those illiterate people. And don't make a mistake, and I'm saying it with the greatest of respect. We are sitting with suspects who are illiterate, who does not understand the procedure, and the police know it, and they exploit it by harassing those people and threatening them and intimidating them and luring them into some form of promises where that suspect sign a document of which he does not know the contents, and he does not understand the contents, and he does not understand the result of that document. I'm an old criminal. I know these type of things, and fortunately where I am at this stage, when I'm acting in criminal trials, I take specific cognizance of those procedures, because I've made up my mind, if you are not found guilty in a proper way, beyond reasonable doubt, I will not convict you. And I've seen it in my experience there. The police make blunders. They make mistakes. But I cannot close my eyes for their mistakes and convict a person who is not found guilty beyond reasonable doubt. That's the end of story. 0.0001% of doubt, not guilty. I've indicated to you previously in one of the lectures of the guy who identified my client at Kleinfontein in the shop, where he said I was 90% sure it was, let's say, accused number 2. And the judge convicted him. And he was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment. And on appeal it got overturned. The sentence, the conviction was set aside, so the sentence. In criminal law, you must create doubt. That's all you need to do. But how to do it is a little bit more difficult than just saying you must create doubt. So until next time, Just before I end, you must go and read that book on legal issues, Know Your Rights. It's quite a thick one. I've spent a lot of time on that one, even incorporating some foreign law, international law, through Canadian law. This was quite an interesting book to write. It deals with accused person, it deals with suspects, it deals with a lot of case law and precedents. I'm not going to repeat it. It's in that book. You must go and read it. Make yourself an index where you find what. I've enjoyed writing this book. It gave me more insight into the working and how you can apply Section 35 of the Constitution. It deals explicitly with an explanation and an analysis of Section 35. Chapter 4 deals with fairness. It deals with some of the Canadian law that I have, and cases that I have included. It also deals especially with the phrase used as the detriment to the administration of justice in terms of Section 35, that is Chapter 5. Go and read it. Because if you stand up in a court and you can start to argue with a judge, and you'll need it, especially with pointing out and confessions, you will need to use the information in this book. Know Your Rights. It's there. It's the Bible of Know Your Rights. There are plenty of examples. There are plenty of arguments in here. There are references to tests that are applicable in evaluating the evidence before the court. It deals with real evidence. It deals with documentary evidence. It deals with the aspect of whether you were arrested or detained. If you are arrested, you are on the way to become an accused. If you are detained, you can only be taken away for a while for a specific reason and then released. But your right to freedom is still infringed. Your right to remain silent may be infringed. Your right to incriminate yourself may be infringed. And if you are lucky enough to get to your client just after he has been arrested, before the police took over and start to do whatever they want to, you keep quiet. You sign nothing. And if they harass you, you phone me. And take note of the persons. As I've indicated earlier on, give him a piece of paper and give him a pen. Take note of who is consulting with you, who is harassing you, who is taking you where, etc., etc. There's a client of mine who was arrested in Mamelodi for murder. And the police was harassing him for about 24 hours, on and off. He didn't sleep, nothing. So they put him in a vehicle and they drove around with him. His face was covered. So they took him to a place. They said to him, "You're on a bridge." So they pushed him to the side of the road, and those little culverts, and they put him on top of the culvert. They say, "You are now on a bridge near the Harabespoort Dam, and if you don't talk and if you don't want to work with us, we're going to throw you over the bridge." So my client jumped, and he landed on his feet, and he started laughing. And he told me the story. He said, "I come from Mamelodi. I know that place from front to back, from top to bottom. I knew exactly where they were taking me. I knew exactly the spot where they took me. I knew there was a culvert. The culvert was about a foot high." He said, "So I jumped." You know what? The police took him back to their cells and they never harassed him again. Unfortunately, he phoned me and we started with his trial. And at the end of the day, he got discharged in terms of Section 174. So there's also a little humor in being an accused and being harassed by the police. But take note of that book. Section 35 is very, very, very important. If you want to go into criminal law, that should be your Bible together with your handbook on criminal law, as well as the Constitution. You get these little small books, very handy. Pocket books, you can write on them and throw them away and go and get another one. So until next time, have a nice day.